I'm Katie Leventhal. I was a teacher here for a long time. I taught 6th grade world cultures and language arts for many years before realizing that I was in the right place, just not the right role. And so as I transitioned into this role as counselor, it's the right fit for me, which feels really great. And I feel honored to have been with a lot of you as your kids have grown up. And in addition to my role as school counselor, I think it's important to acknowledge that I bring in a lot of different lenses into the way I view academic pressure and anxiety. I feel like it's important to acknowledge. I'm a school counselor. I'm also a licensed clinical and mental health counselor. So I work with teenagers and adults, and a lot of what we talk about is anxiety and how it shows up. So some of my clinical mind comes in here when I talk about what I see in students in school. So that's a part of my work. And then I'm a parent, so I have a 7-year-old Sarah, and I have a 5-year-old Charlie, and then I got this guy coming in June. Like a perfect educator baby would do. Not planned at all. And of course, I think my experience as a teacher comes into the way I view academic pressure. It's always there for me, and I think especially working in a school, having been a teacher, really helps me keep in mind the academic pressures that they're under, and that's at the forefront of their minds. And then I had up here originally a former student, but I changed that to lifelong student because things are changing at such a fast rate for adolescents that I'm constantly being challenged to educate myself. It's never a dull moment. There's always something else that's come out that I don't understand, don't know. And so I think one of the beauties of this job is it lends itself to, it's never dull. We're constantly learning. So these are the lenses that I'm going to bring into our talk today. And that's important because a part of the supporting adolescence is understanding ourselves. And I'm going to start off with a personal anecdote. As I was thinking about academic success and anxiety and pressure, I was thinking about what did that mean for me growing up? What did that look like? Please know that it comes with gratitude for my parents and also a lot of privilege that came up in my upbringing. But this is a picture of me when I was my son's age, about 4. And when I was looking at a lot of pictures of my childhood, you'll often see me in Duke gear. I grew up in Raleigh, went to public schools here, and that's a whole other ball game growing up in the South with the Duke rivalry, as we say. But when I was thinking about academic success and what it meant to me growing up, one of the things I started thinking about was before I had the language to know what academic success was or to know what university or college or schooling was like, my parents were putting me in something they were really proud of. And they both went to Duke. They talked about Duke a lot. They got married at Duke. My grandparents went to Duke. My brother and sister, I'm a middle child. That'll come out as I'm talking today. Both my siblings went to Duke. And so I mention that because there was a lot of messaging that I was receiving growing up that I didn't know was the messaging. And my parents weren't saying Duke is good, Duke is the place to go, Duke means success. But there were things like this happening for me way before I understood what success meant. And so as I started to get into middle school and into high school, and that individualization is starting to happen, and that separation from parents is happening. What was happening for me internally that I didn't have the words for is what is good? What does success mean? And in my mind, it was this. It was going to Duke, and it was the weekends that we were spending going to Duke Chapel or walking around campus hearing stories. And it became really difficult for me to separate that. I didn't know that there was really any other option, that it was to go here, and here meant good. And here meant success, and here meant that I was going to have a life that I wanted to have. And I don't think, there wasn't a lot of language at the time for my parents around that messaging or understanding what that meant to them. So it's not shade on them, but as I got into high school, as a typical middle child does, there was this rebellion, and there was this, I don't want anything to do with what my parents are messaging me about. But at the same time came up this sense of, but that's not how it's supposed to be, that's not right, that's not good. And so when it came time to make the decision about where I wanted to go, I felt this deep sense of anxiety around what the right choice was, around being a failure. And I didn't know that was happening. And surprise, surprise, I did not go to Duke. I went to Carolina, which is still very difficult for my parents to swallow, I think, on some unconscious level. On top of that, growing up in the South, where at school, these games become such a big deal, and people have really strong opinions about the people that go there. And that was so confusing to me, and I didn't know that that was confusing to me. And even though I'm in my 40s and I'm looking back, still to this day, when there's a Carolina Duke game going on, I feel this sense of anxiety come up. I can't talk to my family on those days. And it's like a stupid basketball game. That doesn't mean, I hate to say this, it means nothing, right? But I feel it inside as if I have done something wrong. And so I just put that out there to say that academic success and anxiety and the connection between the two is really complex, and it's really individual. And there's so much at play here. And so I kind of wanted to start us off with, we know what academic pressure is, but as you sit with students, particularly here, which has been my experience, what you realize is that there's so much that goes into this for them that they need the language for. And so we spend a lot of time, at least in the counseling office or in our advisory program, trying to dissect all the pieces of where academic pressure comes from. Students or adolescents tend to be able to say, well, it's connected to schoolwork. But of course we know it's more than that. It's expectations, it's competition, it's societal pressures. It's coming from a lot of different ways, different areas. And so I like to think about this as we've got the internal pressure we feel. That's really big as a middle schooler because our whole identity is under renovation. And so that internal pressure of what does success mean and who am I, all of that is undergoing all of this stuff. And there's a pressure there to figure it out. And of course, who are we looking to? We're looking to who's beside us, right? So then the external pressures come in. And that's messaging from our peers, that's messaging from our teachers, that's messaging from our parents. So we've got that coming in. And then we've got, society, what's happening in the global world or what's happening in the culture of the school where we go. So gosh, when you break that down, it's no wonder they don't know. I'm overwhelmed thinking about how I'm affected by that. So I think it's a really good place to start, and a lot of my work is trying to pull back the different layers of what could be going into stress and ultimately anxiety. One of the activities that we do in the counseling office, and this kind of gives a visual to what that is a student will come in and they often will say, I'm feeling really stressed, and I don't know why. And they don't have the language for it, they don't have the words. And so I do this thing where I call it the bubble activity, where essentially we're drawing the different bubbles of their life, extracurricular or academics, or social, all the different things that make up. And I'll say, when you think about the word stress, which of your bubbles are getting bigger as we say that? And usually they can pinpoint that, or they'll say they're all kind of getting bigger. And then we just float around to the different bubbles. What is stressful about friends right now? What is stressful for you right now about school? And of course, underneath that comes all these different categories, some of which I've put up here. Of course, academic expectations, but The changes in the social circle, I don't know, I don't have to tell y'all, we know that's huge for them. We even break down, like doing a group project, is so about who you're with. So the changes in their social circle, which is happening at a rapid pace from 6th through 8th and on, dramatically impacts their stress. Who am I going to be working with? What is our history there? That plays a part of it. Time management, of course. The relationship with their teachers, the relationship with y'all, if those are imbalanced in any way, that shows up in academic stress. And we often don't think that, we don't go to that place. And neither do they. They don't know either. And so that's one of the things we'll do in the counseling office is just sit and try to unpack their stress without any solutions at all. Just simply gaining awareness around what it is they have going on. So that's kind of academic stress. How is that connected to anxiety? How do we know the difference? What's good, what's bad? What do we do with this big capital A anxiety that I think now we hear kids talking about it so much with Inside Out, movies, and we're so lucky that that language is progressing and developing and becoming mainstream. And so, as a counselor, as a therapist, start to become friends with anxiety. And now, not to sound too kitschy, but let's really understand how that shows up for you. Through a question like, how would I know you're anxious? How does that show up for you? And normally they can name that, things like the headaches and the stomach aches and rapid heartbeat or, sweating or, not sleeping or, you can even see them in the office kind of shaking. Usually the physical ones, they're pretty comfortable and they can talk about, so it's usually an easy in. It's where we get to the emotions part that, becomes a little bit more difficult. So we're talking about how anxiety shows up emotionally. There's a lot of kind of giving language to that, and I think that's what our advisory program is trying to do, labeling emotions, what are they, becoming comfortable with them. But those are the things like I'm overwhelmed, or I'm having negative self-talk, I'm being really hypercritical, I'm ruminating, I'm worrying. That's sort of the emotional piece of the anxiety. And then the behavioral one is probably what you all notice all the time. I mean, you know your kids so well, but behavioral representations of anxiety can look like procrastination, it can be avoiding tasks, it can be where you're so hyper-fixated on getting it right, you have to ask a million times. It can be focus in class, it can be disruptive behavior in class, it can be a number of things. So it's and that's 3 different categories, and each of them has their own journey. And so, another thing that we do when we're student support when we're sitting with students is let's break that down. What does that mean for you? So we can start to gain awareness around what happens for us as individuals. And with that awareness, we're not solving it, we're just sitting with it, so that we're not afraid of it. So that's kind of another piece to how I think our office, our department thinks about anxiety. And of course, we know because so many books have been written about, the anxious generation and what is happening in our body between, hitting pressure and anxiety, what's going on. And so we know that our bodies go into this fight or flight response. And with that fight or flight response, leads to hormones coming out. The adrenaline and the cortisol, which then usually causes physical manifestations, the increased heart rate, the rapid breathing, the tension. And so that link is there. And I think we've become more aware of it as a society. We're talking about it more. But, it happens. And even though we know it happens, how do we understand how to not be afraid of it? And I think that's a big piece for the demographic that we're talking about is how do I not be afraid of this happening? How do I get to know myself in that way? I think it's helpful to know, we know this is important. It's also being talked about in research and in key findings all the time. I think in my time in becoming a teacher, the level, the numbers of anxiety diagnoses has dramatically decreased. I'm seeing it a lot in my own practice and of course in my work here with students. We know that, depression and anxiety, these things are impeding learning, so we know this topic is important. But I just had to put that up there, that we're not the only ones, right? It's being talked about. I don't think we have a clear idea of what to do, though. And I think that's the hard part, is we know it's a problem, we know it goes on, and what do we do about it? What we do is we start drawing awareness and start talking about it more and more. And again, back to this external pressures, internal pressures, parental influences, that's all playing the part in this big word pressure, which is not bad. I'm not saying that having pressure doesn't do great things. Having anxiety does really good things for you. It helps you to get things done, or it helps you to prepare. But I think what we're all worried about is it seems like it's going into this pendulum where then we're not able to do the things, and then also we're not able to understand who we are and who we want to be and that whole process. So I think in terms of internal pressures, one of the things that I've experienced working in student support with CA students is this idea of perfectionism and the fear of failure, and how that connects to their self-esteem is a very common pattern that kids are talking about. And they can name it, but trying to work with it and become friends with it is really, really challenging. And part of that piece is they're struggling with this time in their lives where they're wanting to separate from y'all, but they don't know how to do that, and it doesn't feel safe, but they know that they should. And how do I navigate this path where I'm suddenly questioning that? I'm questioning what I have not questioned before. But yet, I still think my parents are the most amazing things, really deep down. They don't say that as much anymore, but they do. They do feel that. And so it's tricky. And I think it's really tricky as parents on how to navigate this. What do you do? What do you say? What do you not say? I don't have a middle schooler yet, but I know I'm in for it. And I spend all my time with middle schoolers, and I know I'm going to be just like, how do I do this whole thing? So when I think about how I want to prep for that stage in my parenthood journey, or even as a counselor, the things I try to do when I'm trying to sit with a student is really thinking about how this shows up for me. What did academic success look like for me? What kind of messaging was I getting? Then I'm either trying to do everything I can not to do, right? The typical, I'm going to do the opposite of my parents. Or what is I kind of still want to do, but I don't want to do? Or is even talking about grades, is there anxiety for me coming up back here? Am I thinking about 20 years down the road and them not doing well? Is that coming up for me? It does for me now with a 5-year-old. So I think all of that is natural, but to really have a good sense of what happens for you. What has happened for you? How does that impact your ability to sit and listen to what your child is saying when they will talk, which I know is really a flippable point. And then sort of in times when you're not in a state of a crisis with your child who's going through all this stuff, can you think about the ways in which you want to show up for them when they're stressed about schoolwork? Or, how much emphasis are you putting on achievement and grades? Is that the emphasis you want to be putting on? What does supporting them through academic stress look like? What do you want to be doing? What does that look like for your family? I think that kind of self-reflection really only brings more awareness to what we want to be doing. And maybe you're already doing that. I think it's really important and hard to do when you're in the middle of a moment with your child. It's hard to, for me, I'm taking this parenting class right now. And one of the things in the parenting class talks about trying to draw your own awareness to to when the shark music is coming up in the back of your mind, you're like, no, 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 no. Like, for all of us at different moments, that kind of comes up while we're trying to like talk to kids and we don't know it. We don't know that's happening for us often. So how can we start to become aware of when that shark music is coming up for you? To then see it and kind of dial it down so that we can separate that from, what's happening in front of us. I haven't figured that out yet. I'm in the process of it, so I am in a parenting class right now. And so, I think oftentimes I've talked to parents, we want the solution, what do we do? How do we address this? And, I don't know that this is the answer, but these are some things that I've been trying with students that I have had some success with. So a lot of times I'll talk to students around, if you come in here stressed, what is going to help you? What do you need? Do you need me to talk you through the emotions? Do you need silence? Do you need space? And kind of getting a plan with them around what is support to them. And very rarely do they want a solution. At least that's what they tell me. They don't want to hear how an adult would solve it. Not that they shouldn't hear that, but they don't want to in the moment. At least their brains are not open to that in that moment. They often just want to feel like they're not alone, that they're not odd or weird or dumb for thinking that. And it's on like a real basic level. And so that open communication when we're not in those moments of pressure or stress, I think is helpful to get a sense of what they need as much as we can. And then of course like encouraging balance, which I know you all do. How do we take breaks between what we're doing, or do we have 5 or 6 extracurriculars going on? What does balance look like for our family? How do we make sure we're getting that? And I think even though they won't tell us, validating them, it just goes so far. And they pretend that it doesn't. But a lot of times what I hear from them is their statements around, I just want to make my parents proud. On a deep core level, I want them to be proud of me. And they don't know how to say that, and they don't know how to put emotions to that, and they don't even know if they should feel that. And they're really worried about disappointing you all. I'm not saying y'all specifically, I'm saying in general it's a pattern. And yet I'm supposed to pretend like I don't need them. It's such a hard time, And so just validating, gosh, that's so hard. I mean, it's just so hard what you're going through. I can't imagine. I didn't have to go through the pressures you're going through in the same way. I think goes a long way in really trying to be present with them. And of course, when they're in a regulated state and they're not in crisis, talking about, what has worked for you. I think there's a place to talk about what you do as an adult and how you cope with things. I think that those conversations matter. It's just when they happen, where I feel like adolescents will receive them or they will reject them completely. I mean, it's like a minefield, isn't it? Like, okay, we can't touch that today. But they are listening to that. And I think they're watching you all the time, which is our job as a parent so hard. And then just practically, do I know what anxiety looks like for my child? Do I know what the behavioral, emotional, internal parts, do they know what that is? So how can we have a really good sense of our own, and how does that show up for my child? Just endless empathy and understanding. I think the last one is seeking help when needed. I think there is a point where anxiety can become unmanageable in your own household, and that is normal, and that is okay. And there are people that specialize in this. So come on down to my practice and I'll help you. I think it's okay that we don't know as parents what to do all the time. And, our culture, our society doesn't really support that idea. It's supposed to be like the way our kids are showing up in the world is a reflection of who we are. And that's a really hard thing to break. I feel it already with this. the way I'm doing my pregnancy at 41 is going to, have an impact on how he's going to be. That messaging is coming to me all the time, But gosh, if we could just like let that go or put that down, it would allow us to seek help, around when we see our child suffering, and we feel like an outside resource would be great. So, I think if I was like coming up with my two major takeaways around this topic, it's just that we have to really understand ourselves in order to understand our child and what they're saying, what they're going through, and to keep that dialogue going. Not only with each other, as parents, but with him, because it's changing and shifting. Not to mention the influence of social media and digital stuff that plays a part of this too. And that was very different for us, at least for me. That's a whole other ballgame, which we are doing a session on, so stay tuned for that.